Welcome to Lore of the Ring, where we uncover the hidden roads of Middle-earth and tell the tales that Tolkien never wrote. Before we begin, take a moment to let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day or night this narration has reached you. In the beginning, there was only the void, not emptiness as mortals understand it, not the absence of light or sound, but something older, something that existed before existence itself had a name. The Aenir called it the timeless halls, that space beyond space where thought itself was the only substance, where music had not yet been born, and where the one Iluvatar, the All-Father, dwelt in solitude that was not loneliness. But solitude, even for the one, carries within it the seed of creation. From the depths of his thought, Iluvatar brought forth the Aenir, spirits of pure intellect and power, each a fragment of his own infinite mind. They were beings of flame and starlight, of mountain and sea, of wind and word. They had no form as you or I would recognize, yet they were more real than the stone beneath your feet. They were the first children of thought, and to them, Iluvatar revealed a theme, a single, shimmering thread of melody that contained within it all the potential of what might be. "Make in harmony together a great music," he commanded them. "For ye have been kindled with the flame imperishable, and ye shall show forth your powers in adorning this theme, each with his own thoughts and devices." And so they sang. The music of the Aenir was no mere song. It was creation itself, possibility made sound. Mountains rose in cascading arpeggios. Oceans swelled in deep, resonant tones that shook the foundations of thought. Rivers carved their courses through valleys that existed only in melody. Forests grew in harmonies so complex they seemed to breathe. And stars, oh, the stars, kindled in high, piercing notes that hung in the darkness like diamonds scattered across velvet. For an age that had no measure in years, the Aenir sang. Their voices intertwined in patterns of breathtaking complexity, each adding their own color to the tapestry of sound. Manwë, mightiest of them all, sang of winds that had never blown. Ulmo wove themes of waters that had never flowed. Alla's deep voice shaped mountains that had never risen. And Yavanna sang of living things, of growth and green, of life that had never drawn breath. But there was discord. Among the Aenir stood one whose power rivaled even Manwë's. His name was Melkor, and to him had been given the greatest gifts of all the Aenir, knowledge of all the themes that Iluvatar had revealed, and the ambition to master them. In the beginning, his voice had been glorious, adding grandeur and power to the great music. But as the music grew, so too did something dark within Melkor's heart. He began to wonder, why should he merely adorn the theme of another? Why should his power serve a design not his own? In secret, if anything can be secret in the timeless halls, Melkor had descended alone into the void, seeking the flame imperishable, that power by which Iluvatar brought thought into being. He sought to create, not to adorn, to be master, not servant. But the flame was not there, for it remained with Iluvatar alone, and Melkor returned empty-handed, though he did not know it. What he brought back instead was far more terrible. Ideas of his own, thoughts that sprang not from the theme of Iluvatar, but from his own desire for dominion. And so, as the great music reached its first crescendo, Melkor began to weave his own themes into the melody. At first, they seemed merely variations, embellishments that added power to the whole. But soon they grew discordant. Where others sang of light, Melkor sang of darkness. Where they sang of growth, he sang of frost and fire. Where they sang of harmony, he sang of chaos. The music began to falter. Around Melkor, some of the Aenir, drawn by the power and boldness of his voice, began to attune their own music to his. The discord grew, spreading like cracks through crystal, until two musics warred in the timeless halls, the theme of Iluvatar and the counter-theme of Melkor. The sound was terrible, a clash that shook the very foundations of thought itself. And then Iluvatar stood. He raised his hand, and a new theme began, deeper than the first, more sorrowful and more beautiful, a melody that seemed to acknowledge the discord, yet weave it into something greater. Melkor redoubled his efforts, his music now openly defiant, a great storm of sound meant to drown out all others. But Iluvatar smiled, though there was sadness in it, and began a third theme. This one was unlike the others. It was quiet at first, barely audible beneath the warring melodies. But it grew, soft yet irresistible, a sound of such profound beauty and sorrow that even some of Melkor's followers fell silent in wonder. It spoke of endings and beginnings, of death that gives meaning to life, of loss that makes joy possible. It was the sound of mortality, of time itself, of the strange and fleeting beauty of things that must end. And in that moment, even Melkor's discord became part of the design, though he knew it not. Then, with a word and a gesture, Iluvatar ended the music. Silence fell in the timeless halls, not the silence of the void, but the silence of completion, of a work finished. And Iluvatar spoke. "Behold your music." Before the Aenir, a vision unfolded. They saw what their music had created, a vast sphere hanging in darkness, and in the midst of it, a world. Arda, they would call it, the kingdom. They saw it whole, from its creation to its end, a history already complete yet not yet begun. They saw the rise of mountains and the carving of seas. They saw the kindling of stars and the birth of living things. They saw beauty beyond measure, and they saw tragedy that broke their hearts. And in that vision, they saw something entirely unexpected. In a hidden place, beside still waters under starlight, small figures awakened, smaller than the Aenir, more fragile than the mountains, briefer than the stars. The children of Iluvatar, the elves and later men, beings that the Aenir themselves had not imagined, for they were part of Iluvatar's secret theme, the one that he alone had sung. The Aenir stood in wonder. Even Melkor, seeing the children, felt a stirring of desire, not for their good, but to possess them, to bend them to his will. The vision faded, and Iluvatar spoke again. "This is your minstrelsy, and each of you shall find contained therein the things which it may seem that he himself devised or added. And you, Melkor, will discover all the secret thoughts of your heart, and perceive that they are but a part of the whole and tributary to its glory." But Melkor was not chastened. He saw only what he desired to see, a realm to dominate, beings to rule, a chance to prove that his power could rival even that of the One. And so, when Iluvatar gave the word and the vision became reality, when Ea, the world that is, came into being, many of the Aenir descended into it, taking on the forms and substance of the world they had helped to sing into existence. They would be called the Valor, the powers of Arda, and with them came many lesser spirits, the Maiar. But Melkor descended too, and his purpose was darker than all others. The stage was set. The world was born. And in the darkness of that newborn realm, a shadow stirred, patient, powerful, and utterly malevolent. The first age had not yet begun, but its doom was already written in the music, a dissonance that would echo through all the ages of the world. The world that the Valor entered was raw and unfinished, a realm of primal chaos where the music's vision had not yet fully taken form. Mountains thrust up from the earth like the bones of some vast creature. Seas crashed against shores that had never known the touch of tide. The sky was empty of stars, a vast darkness broken only by the dim light that seemed to emanate from the world itself, a glow like embers in ash, the last remnants of the flame imperishable that had kindled creation. The Valar set to work. Manwë, lord of the breath of Arda, claimed the heights and established his throne upon the tallest mountain, where he could survey all the world. Beside him stood Varda, whom the elves would later call Elbereth, Lady of the Stars, though she had not yet kindled them. Ulmo, Lord of Waters, plunged into the deeps and began to shape the oceans, his voice becoming one with the music of waves and currents. Alla the Smith delved into the bones of the earth, shaping mountains and valleys, perfecting the craft of stone and metal. Yavanna walked the barren lands and sang, and where she passed, the first green things began to grow. Not yet the great forests that would come, but small, tentative life, testing the soil and air. Beside her, Orome the hunter ranged the wild places, and his horn echoed across empty plains. But Melkor had also descended into Arda, and his purpose was not to build but to mar. Where the Valar labored, he undermined. Where they raised mountains, he cast them down. Where they gathered waters, he scattered them. He made his dwelling in the far north, in a fortress of ice and stone that he called Utumno, and there he bred creatures of his own, twisted things, mockeries of the life that Yavanna cherished. The Valar struggled against him, and the world shook with their conflict. This was the spring of Arda, though it was a spring troubled by storms. At last, the Valar prevailed, or so it seemed. They drove Melkor from his fortress and raised 2 great lamps to light the world, Iluin in the north and Ormel in the south. These were not mere lights, but pillars of radiance, vast columns of stone and metal that held aloft flames brighter than any fire, gifts of Alla's craft and Varda's power. Under their light, the whole world bloomed. The spring became summer, and Arda was beautiful. In the midst of the world, in the place where the light of both lamps mingled, the Valar built their first dwelling, the Isle of Almaren, a place of such beauty that even the memory of it would later bring tears to those who heard its name. There they rested from their labors, trusting that the world was now secure. But Melkor had not been destroyed. He had only retreated, nursing his wrath in the depths. He returned in secret, rebuilding his fortress in the north, now called Angband, the Iron Prison, and there he plotted vengeance. With stealth and malice, he crept south and assailed the great lamps. The pillars cracked. The flames fell. The lamps of the Valar toppled in ruin, and where they fell, the earth itself broke. Seas rushed in to fill vast chasms. Mountains were cast down. Fire and flood swept across Arda, and the Isle of Almaren was destroyed, sinking beneath the waves. The spring of Arda was ended, drowned in catastrophe. The Valar, grieving, withdrew to the uttermost west, to the continent of Ammon, where they raised new mountains, the Pelori, tallest in all the world, to shield their new realm from Melkor's malice. There they built Valinor, the land of the Valar, and there they brought what beauty they could save from the ruin of Middle-earth. Yavanna sang again, and the 2 trees grew, Talpirion the silver and Laurelin the gold, whose light was older and purer than sun or moon, which did not yet exist. Under their mingled radiance, Valinor became a realm of eternal beauty, a paradise beyond the reach of shadow. But Middle-earth they left in darkness, lit only by stars that Varda now began to kindle in the heavens, distant, cold lights that nonetheless carried a promise. The Valar had not wholly abandoned the world. And in that darkness, beside still waters in a hidden land called Cuivanen, the water of awakening, something stirred. The elves opened their eyes. They woke to starlight, and their first sight was of silver points scattered across the black vault of heaven. They heard the sound of water, gentle and eternal. They felt the cool grass beneath them and the soft wind on their faces. They had no memory of a time before, no knowledge of who or what they were. They only knew wonder. They called themselves the Quendi, the speakers, for they were the first to put thought into words, the first to give names to the world around them. And they loved the stars above all things, for the stars had been their first sight. But even in Cuivanen, shadow reached out. Melkor had seen their awakening in his far northern throne, and his desire for them was terrible. He sent his servants, dark spirits that would later be called the Yuvanimir, or monsters, to hunt the elves in the darkness, to capture them and drag them away. And in the depths of Angband, Melkor began his most terrible work, the twisting of some of the captured elves into new forms, creatures of malice and cruelty. The first orcs were born from torture and corruption, a mockery of the firstborn, and their creation was a wound upon the music itself. For an age uncounted, the elves dwelt in the darkness of Cuivanen, and those years are lost to memory. No chronicle records their early wanderings. No song fully captures those first days of wonder and discovery. But fragments remain, echoes in the oldest elven legends, whispers passed down through millennia, memories too precious to forget entirely. They learned to speak, and their language was like music, each word a small song. They gave names to everything, to the waters and the stones, to the trees and the stars. And in naming, they learned the joy of creation, for to name a thing is to make it real in a new way, to acknowledge its existence and honor it. They learned to make tools, to weave cloth, to build shelters. They discovered fire and were amazed by it, a star brought down to earth, warm and alive in their hands. They formed communities, tribes bound not by kinship alone, but by shared wonder at the world. And they wandered. The elves were not content to remain in one place, even one as beautiful as Cuivanen. Some traveled east into lands that would never be mapped, that would vanish from history entirely. Others went south, where great forests grew under the starlight, forests so vast and deep that a traveler could walk for years and never see the same tree twice. Still others ventured north, though they did not go far, for from the north came cold winds and dark rumors. They encountered other beings in their wanderings, not other elves, but spirits. Some were Maiar who had lingered in Middle-earth when the Valar departed, lesser Ainur who loved the wild places too much to leave them. From these spirits, the elves learned much: songs of power, lore of the stars, knowledge of growing things. But some of these spirits were servants of Melkor, and from them, the elves learned fear. Disappearances began. An elf would wander too far from camp and not return. A hunting party would set out and only half would come back, their eyes haunted, speaking of shadows that moved against the stars and voices that called from the darkness. Parents would wake to find their children gone, taken in the night without a sound. The elves called these hunters the Yuvanimi, the monsters, and they learned to fear the dark despite loving the stars that shone within it. They kept great fires burning at night, posted watchers, traveled in large groups. But still, the disappearances continued. In Valinor, Varda looked down from her high seat and saw the plight of the firstborn. Her heart moved with pity, and she resolved to give them a gift. Climbing to the summit of the highest mountain, she reached up into the darkness and gathered the dews of Talpirion, the silver tree, and with them she created new stars, brighter than those she had made before, arranged in patterns that told stories that gave hope. She made Wilwerin, the butterfly, and Telumendel, the firmament. She made Menelmacar, the swordsman of the sky, whose belt would later be called Orion. And greatest of all, she made Carnil and Luinil, Nanar and Lumbar, Alcarinque and Elimure, the great stars that would guide travelers and give courage to the lost. But even these were not enough to drive back the shadow. Orome the hunter, who alone of the valor still often visited Middle-earth, was riding through the forests when he heard singing. Curious, he followed the sound and came upon Cuivanen. There he saw the elves for the first time, and his heart was filled with joy and sorrow, joy at their beauty and vitality, sorrow that they dwelt in darkness and fear. He greeted them, and they were terrified. Here was a being of such power and majesty that he seemed to be made of light itself, mounted on a horse that shone white even in the darkness. Some fled, others stood frozen, but a few, braver or more curious than the rest, remained and listened as Orome spoke to them in words they could understand, though his voice was like thunder made gentle, like a storm that had learned to sing. He told them of Valinor, of the light of the two trees, of the valor who had made the world and who wished the elves no harm. He told them of Melkor, the enemy, who sent the hunters in the night. And he offered them a choice, to remain in Middle-earth, in lands now claimed by shadow, or to journey west to Valinor, where they would dwell in safety and light. The elves were divided. Some distrusted Orome, believing him to be one of the hunters in disguise. Others feared to leave the only home they had ever known. Still others longed for the light he described, weary of living in fear. After much debate, 3 elves were chosen to accompany Orome to Valinor as ambassadors: Ingwe, Finwe, and Elwe. They would see the blessed realm with their own eyes and return to tell their people what they had found. The journey was long, and the 3 elves saw wonders beyond imagining. They crossed rivers that sang, climbed mountains whose peaks touched the sky, and finally came to the great sea, Belegir, the sundering seas, which they had never imagined could exist, so vast was it. Ulmo himself rose from the waters to bear them across, and they stood at last in Valinor. The light of the trees struck them like a physical blow. After so long in darkness, the radiance of Lorelin and Talpirion was almost too much to bear. But as their eyes adjusted, they saw beauty that surpassed all description. Gardens where every flower was a masterpiece, halls of stone that seemed to have grown rather than been built, music that wove through the air like living silk. The Valor welcomed them with honor, and for a time measured in Valinor, though it was years by the reckoning of Middle-earth, the 3 dwelt among the powers and learned from them. And when they returned to Cuivanen, they spoke with one voice. The elves should undertake the great journey. They should go west to the light, but not all were convinced. The elves divided into those who would go and those who would remain. Those who chose to journey westward were called the Eldar, the people of the stars, though they themselves called their choice the Great Choice, for it would shape all their history to come. Those who refused, whether from fear or love of Middle-earth or simple stubbornness, were called the Avari, the unwilling, and they faded from the great tales, becoming legend even to their own kin. The journey began. 3 great hosts set out from Cuivanen, led by the 3 ambassadors who had seen Valinor. The Vanyar, smallest in number but swiftest of foot, followed Ingwe. The Noldor, greatest in crafts and lore, followed Finwe. And the Teleri, most numerous of all and most reluctant to leave, followed Elwe Singalo and his brother Alwe. The journey would take centuries. It would cross half the width of Middle-earth, through lands that had never known travelers, past mountains and forests and rivers without names. Some would never reach Valinor. Some would stop along the way, choosing to make new homes in places of beauty they discovered. Others would be lost to shadow, to accident, to the lingering malice of Melkor. But as the Eldar marched westward, singing beneath the stars, they did not know what awaited them, neither the glory nor the doom that would mark their kindred forever. For in the far north, in the depths of Angband, Melkor watched their departure with cold fury. He had lost his prey, but he swore an oath of his own. He would have them back, or he would destroy them. And in secret, in forges beneath the earth, he began to plan his revenge. The fortress of Angband was not merely built, it was hewn from malice itself. In the frozen wastes of the north, where even starlight seemed reluctant to fall, Melkor had chosen his throne. Here, in a vast crater surrounded by mountains of iron and ice, he commanded his servants to dig. They burrowed deep into the earth, creating dungeons and halls, forges and armories, prisons and torture chambers. The deepest of these pits were so far beneath the surface that even the roots of mountains did not reach them, places where no light had ever shone and no hope could survive. Above these depths rose the fortress itself, Angband, the Hell of Iron. Its gates were vast beyond measure, wrought of black steel and set with spells of terror. Its walls were unscalable, smooth as glass yet strong as the bones of the world. Its towers clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers, and from their peaks, watchful eyes looked out across all the lands of the north. Before the gates, Melkor raised the triple-peaked mountain of Thangorodrim, a monument to his power and a threat to all who opposed him. The peaks smoked and fumed, belching ash and flame, for beneath them ran rivers of molten stone, and in the forges that lined those rivers, weapons of war were made without ceasing. Melkor no longer called himself by that name. The elves had begun to speak of him in whispers, calling him Morgoth, the black foe of the world, and he accepted the title with grim satisfaction. If he could not be worshipped as a creator, he would be feared as a destroyer. His servants multiplied. The orcs bred in the darkness, taught cruelty and hatred, shaped into armies. But they were not his only servants. There were Balrogs, demons of fire and shadow, fallen Maiar who had followed Melkor into darkness and taken forms of terror. Chief among these was Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, whose mere presence could cause brave warriors to flee. There were wolves of enormous size and malice, bred to hunt and kill. There were dragons, still in their early forms, wingless worms of fire and venom, but terrible nonetheless. And there was Sauron. Once he had been Meron, a Maya of Ale, skilled in craft and making. But Melkor's promises of power and order had seduced him, and he had become the greatest of all Morgoth's servants, not in raw strength, for the Balrogs exceeded him in that, but in cunning and will. Sauron became Morgoth's lieutenant, the architect of his strategies, the voice of his malice made subtle. From Angband, Morgoth sent forth his armies to reclaim what he considered his, all of Middle-earth, and especially the elves who had dared to flee toward Valinor. The lands of the north became places of nightmare. Forests burned without warning, the flames spreading faster than any elf could run. Rivers ran poisoned, their waters black and foul. The ground itself seemed to rebel, opening into sudden chasms that swallowed the unwary. And always, Morgoth's creatures hunted, killing not out of need but from sheer delight in destruction. But Morgoth's reach extended even farther than his armies. He sent dreams among the elves, dark visions that poisoned their thoughts, sowing suspicion and fear. He sent whispers, lies clothed in truth, that turned friend against friend, kindred against kindred. This was his true genius, not merely to destroy, but to corrupt, to turn the creations of Iluvatar against themselves. Yet the elves were not defenseless. Among the Noldor had arisen princes of great wisdom and power. Chief among these was Finwë's eldest son, Fëanor, the spirit of fire. He was the greatest craftsman the world had ever seen, his skill surpassing even that of Alle who had taught his people. Fëanor's mind burned with an inner light, a creativity and passion that produced wonders but also, in time, would lead to tragedy. In Valinor, for the Vanyar and Noldor had completed their journey, and even most of the Teleri had finally crossed the sea, Fëanor created his masterwork. Inspired by the mingled light of the two trees, he captured that radiance in 3 jewels unlike any others, the Silmarils. They were not merely beautiful, they were holy. The light within them was the light of the trees themselves, preserved in crystal that Fëanor had created through art and craft that he could never replicate. The Silmarils shone with their own inner fire, a radiance that seemed alive, that brought joy to all who saw them and despair to those with evil in their hearts. Varda herself blessed them, decreeing that no mortal flesh, nor any flesh impure, could touch them without being burned. Morgoth, hearing of the Silmarils even in distant Angband, desired them beyond all else. Here was light that he could corrupt, beauty that he could mar, a symbol of everything he hated and envied. His lust for the Silmarils became an obsession that would shape all the history of the First Age, but he was not yet strong enough to assail Valinor itself. The Valar kept watch, and the Pelori Mountains stood as an impassable barrier. So Morgoth turned his attention to Middle-earth, to the elves who had remained there or who had begun to return, dissatisfied with Valinor's peace. Among these was Elwë Singalo, who would be called Thingol. During the Great Journey, he had encountered Melian, a Maya of Yavanna, spirit of the forests and growing things. They had fallen in love, and Thingol had abandoned his people's journey to remain with her in Middle-earth. In the forests of Beleriand, they established a kingdom, Doriath, the Hidden Kingdom, surrounded by Melian's magic. The Girdle of Melian, as it came to be called, was a barrier of enchantment. None could enter Doriath without Thingol's permission, and those with evil intent found themselves hopelessly lost in the forest, wandering in circles until they fled in terror or died of exposure. Within that protected realm, the Sindar, the Grey Elves, those who had begun the journey but not completed it, dwelt in relative peace. But beyond Doriath's borders, Morgoth's power grew. His armies poured south from Angband in ever greater numbers, establishing strongholds, claiming territory. The lands of the north became known as the Ard Galen, the Green Region, for they were vast plains of grass and scattered trees. But all who dwelt there did so in the shadow of Thangorodrim, and few nights passed without some sign of Morgoth's malice. Distant fires on the horizon, screams echoing from the mountains, or the discovery of some traveler's remains. The Sindar fought back as best they could, but they were overmatched. They had not the weapons or the knowledge of war that would come later. They needed allies, strength, hope. And then, like a promise fulfilled, like a prophecy made real, sails appeared on the eastern horizon. The Noldor were returning to Middle-earth. But they came not as refugees fleeing darkness, but as a host of warriors seeking vengeance. They came not in peace, but with blood on their hands and doom in their hearts. For in Valinor, catastrophe had struck. The trees were dead, The light of the blessed realm was extinguished, and the Silmarils had been stolen. Morgoth had achieved what the Valar thought impossible. He had struck at the heart of Ammon itself, and Middle-earth would drown in the consequences. The stage was set for the greatest tragedy of the Elder Days, a tale of heroism and hubris, of love and betrayal, of jewels that shone with sacred light and the terrible price paid to possess them. The First Age, in truth, was only now beginning. The coming of Morgoth to Valinor is a tale of such treachery that even now, ages after, it is spoken of only in whispers. He did not come openly, nor with armies. Such would have been futile against the might of the Valar. Instead, he came in disguise, cloaked in false humility, aided by one of the great spirits of the world. Ungoliant, the primordial darkness given spider shape, an entity of hunger so vast that not even Morgoth fully understood what he had unleashed. Together, they approached the two trees. It was during a festival, when all of Valinor gathered on the green hill of Ezelohar to celebrate beneath the trees' light. Morgoth and Ungoliant struck in that hour, the spider demon draining the trees of their sap and light, her dark webs choking their branches while Morgoth stabbed them with a great spear. The trees died, their light failing, and darkness fell over Valinor for the first time since its founding. In the chaos and grief that followed, Morgoth fled to the dwelling of Finwë, for he knew that Fëanor and most of the Noldor were at the festival. There he found Finwë alone, guarding the treasury where the Silmarils were kept. The High King of the Noldor challenged Morgoth, though he had no hope of victory. Morgoth slew him, the first murder in Valinor, the first death in the blessed realm, and took the Silmarils. But the jewels burned him. Varda's blessing ensured that his flesh was seared black where he touched them, his hands forever after in agony. He cared not. He bore them away in an iron casket, fleeing north toward Middle-earth with Ungoliant beside him, demanding her share of the prize. At the great pass of Helcaraxe, the grinding ice, where the frozen seas met the shore, Morgoth and Ungoliant came to terms. She demanded the Silmarils as payment for her aid. He refused. She attacked him, and his screams echoed across the north, bringing his Balrogs forth from Angband to rescue their master. They drove Ungoliant away into the southern lands, where she would brood in darkness and breed a race of monstrous spiders. And Morgoth returned to Angband, placed the Silmarils in his iron crown, and swore that never would he or anyone else remove them. In Valinor, the Noldor learned of their loss, and Fëanor's grief transformed into something terrible, an all-consuming rage, a desire for vengeance that would not be denied. He was the greatest of the Noldor, and in this hour his greatness became his curse. Before all his people, in the public square of Tirion, Fëanor spoke. His words were flame and shadow, passion barely contained. He spoke of the trees that had given them light, now destroyed, of his father Finwë, murdered, of the Silmarils, stolen and defiled by Morgoth's touch. He spoke of the Valar who had failed to protect them, of the cage that Valinor had become, and of Middle-earth where the Noldor could build kingdoms of their own, free from the tyranny of the powers. His words were lies mixed with truth, poison sweetened with honey. But they were also magnificent, and they swayed the hearts of the Noldor. Then Fëanor did something for which there would be no forgiveness. He swore an oath. By the name of Iluvatar himself, the one, the All-Father, whose name was not to be invoked lightly, Fëanor swore that he would pursue anyone who kept a Silmaril from him, be they Vala or elf, Maya or mortal. He swore that neither threat nor pain, fear nor death would prevent him from reclaiming what was his. And he swore that this oath would bind him until the world ended. His 7 sons, Medros, Maglar, Celigorm, Caranthir, Curufin, Amrod, and Amrez, joined him in that oath, their voices ringing out in the darkness. And with those words, they bound themselves to a fate from which there would be no escape. The Noldor prepared for exodus. They would return to Middle-earth, would make war upon Morgoth, would reclaim the Silmarils or die in the attempt. Leading them would be not only Feanor and his sons, but also Fingolfin, Feanor's half-brother and rival, and Fingolfin's children, Fingon, Turgon, and Eredhul. Behind them came a third host led by Finarfin, the youngest of Finwë's sons and the most reluctant to leave Valinor. But there was a problem. They had no ships to cross Belegir, the Great Sea. The only elves with ships were the Teleri, the sea elves who dwelt in the coastal city of Ulqualanda. Feanor went to them and demanded their vessels. The Teleri, loving their ships as dearly as their own children, refused. These were craft that had taken centuries to build, each a work of art, blessed by Ulmo himself. They would not hand them over to support a reckless war. Feanor, consumed by his oath and his rage, would not be denied. He ordered his people to take the ships by force. What followed was the first kinslaying, elf against elf, blood spilled for the first time among the firstborn. The Teleri, though not warriors, fought desperately to defend their ships. Many were killed, their blood staining the white sands of Ulqualanda red. The Noldor prevailed through numbers and fury, seized the ships, and sailed into the night, leaving behind them grief and horror. The Valar, witnessing this atrocity, sent a messenger to the fleeing Noldor, Mandos, Lord of the Dead, whose voice had the weight of prophecy and doom. He spoke what would forever after be called the prophecy of the North. Tears unnumbered ye shall shed, and the Valar will fence Valinor against you and shut you out, so that not even the echo of your lamentation shall pass over the mountains. On the house of Feanor, the wrath of the Valar lieth from the west unto the uttermost east, and upon all that will follow them it shall be laid also. Their oath shall drive them, and yet betray them, and ever snatch away the very treasures that they have sworn to pursue. To evil end shall all things turn that they begin well, and by treason of kin unto kin, and the fear of treason shall this come to pass. The dispossessed shall they be forever. Some of the Noldor, hearing these words, turned back. Finarfin and many of his people chose to return to Valinor and beg forgiveness. But Feanor and the greater part of the host pressed on, either disbelieving the doom or too proud to turn aside. They reached Middle-earth, landing at the place called Losker in the land of Beleriand. But there were not ships enough for all the host. Feanor, in an act of betrayal that would poison his people's unity for centuries, commanded the ships burned. As the flames rose, Fingolfin and his people, still on the far shore of the sea, realized they had been abandoned. They faced a choice: return to Valinor in shame or find another way across. Fingolfin, proud and unyielding, chose the second path. He led his people north to the Helcaraxe, the grinding ice. The crossing of the Helcaraxe is remembered as one of the most terrible journeys in all the histories of the elves. The ice shifted and broke without warning, casting travelers into freezing waters. Blizzards raged without cease. Food was scarce, shelter non-existent. Many died of cold or were lost in the crevasses. The crossing took years, and when at last Fingolfin's host reached the northern shores of Middle-earth, they were hardened beyond measure, their grief and anger forged into something unbreakable. They arrived to find that Feanor was dead. In his first assault on Angband, he had been ambushed by Balrogs and mortally wounded. He died cursing Morgoth, his spirit so fierce that his body burned to ash as he passed. His sons took up his crusade, but they were divided, each interpreting the oath in his own way, each pursuing his own path to doom. The Noldor established kingdoms in Beleriand. Fingolfin became High King, ruling from the northern fortress of Hithlum. His sons took their own realms, Fingon in the eastern marches, Turgon in the hidden valley where he would build Gondolin. The sons of Feanor spread across the land, from the forested realm of Nargothrond to the march of Medros in the east. For a time, they prospered. They made alliance with the Sindar and with Thingol in Doriath. They established realms of beauty and strength, fortresses and cities, libraries and smithies. They held Morgoth at bay, laying siege to Angband itself. This was called the Siege of Angband, and it lasted for nearly 400 years of the sun. For by now, the sun and moon had been created from the last fruit and flower of the dying trees, and time was measured differently. For centuries, the Noldor maintained their watch, preventing Morgoth's forces from spilling forth, slowly tightening their grip. But Morgoth was patient. In the darkness beneath Thangorodrim, he bred his armies, perfected his weapons, and waited for his moment. That moment would come in fire and blood, in a catastrophe so complete that it would break the siege and shatter the kingdoms of the Noldor. But before that doom fell, there would be years of glory, of great deeds and noble sacrifice, of kingdoms hidden and realms made fair, of love and friendship that transcended even the shadow of Morgoth. The threads of fate were tightening, the tapestry of the First Age taking shape. And in that tapestry, light and shadow were so intertwined that none could say where one ended and the other began. In all the tales of Middle-earth, no city has captured the imagination quite like Gondolin, the hidden rock, the last great hope of the Eldar. Its founding was born of foresight and dread. Turgon, son of Fingolfin, had received a vision from Ulmo, Lord of Waters, who alone among the Valar still actively aided the elves in Middle-earth. The vision showed him a hidden vale within the encircling mountains, a place of protection where a great city might be built, a refuge against the day when Morgoth's power would overwhelm all other defenses. Turgon took with him a third of Fingolfin's people, and in secret, they passed through a hidden way into the valley of Tumladen. There, on a great hill of stone in the valley's center, they built Gondolin. It took more than 50 years to complete, and when it was finished, it was the most beautiful city ever raised by elves in Middle-earth. Its walls were white, its towers silver, and its streets paved with marble. Fountains played in every square. Gardens grew on terraces that climbed the hillside. The city was laid out in perfect harmony, each district a masterpiece of design, and at its summit stood the Tower of the King, where Turgon ruled in wisdom and strength. 7 gates guarded the approach to Gondolin, each more formidable than the last, each crafted to delay and demoralize attackers. The outermost was the Gate of Wood, hidden in the ravine. Then came the Gate of Stone, the Gate of Bronze, the Gate of Writhen Iron, the Gate of Silver, the Gate of Gold, and finally the Gate of Steel, which opened directly onto the city itself. Each gate was defended by a warrior host, and each was a work of art as much as a fortification. But Gondolin's greatest defense was not its walls or gates, it was secrecy. Turgon commanded that none who knew the way should reveal it. Those who entered Gondolin did not leave. The city became myth even to those who dwelt in Beleriand, spoken of in whispers as a place of legend, a hope deferred. Even Morgoth did not know its location, though he searched ceaselessly, sending out spies and servants to scour every valley and mountain. For nearly 4 centuries, Gondolin remained hidden, and its people prospered. They were cut off from the wars that ravaged the rest of Beleriand, sheltered by mountains and by Ulmo's blessing. Art flourished within their walls. Children were born who had never seen an orc or heard the howl of a wolf. The terror of Angband seemed a distant nightmare, but isolation breeds complacency. Turgon, for all his wisdom, grew proud. He believed that Gondolin's strength lay in its walls and its secrecy, forgetting that all defenses can be breached, all secrets discovered. He refused to send aid when other kingdoms fell, believing his own survival more important than unity. He would not heed the warnings of Ulmo when they came, dismissing them as the fears of an over-anxious deity. And he did not suspect the traitor in his midst. Mieglin, son of Turgon's sister Eredhul, had grown up in Gondolin. He was skilled in mining and smithcraft, discovering rich lodes of ore in the surrounding mountains and forging weapons of exceptional quality. He loved his cousin Idril, Turgon's daughter, with a passion that bordered on obsession. But Idril loved another, Tuor, a mortal man who had come to Gondolin bearing a message from Ulmo. Tuor and Idril wed, the second union of elf and man in all of history, and their love was true and deep. Mieglin's jealousy festered into hatred, and when chance offered him an opportunity, he took it. While prospecting alone in the mountains, Mieglin was captured by orcs and dragged before Morgoth in Angband. There, under threat of torture and promises of reward, he broke. He revealed the location of Gondolin, the secrets of its defenses, and the best time to attack, during the festival of summer, when the warriors would be celebrating rather than watching. Morgoth rewarded him with assurances that he would rule Gondolin after its fall and take Idril as his prize. Mieglin believed these lies and returned to the city, none knowing of his betrayal. He walked among his people with treason in his heart, counting the days until their doom. On the appointed night, Morgoth struck. His armies had assembled in secret, massing in the northern passes. They came not as a scattered horde, but as a disciplined force, regiments of orcs, packs of wolves, and most terrible of all, dragons. These were not the worms that had existed before, but Morgoth's greatest creation, winged fire drakes, armored in scales that no arrow could pierce, breathing flames that melted stone. Led by Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, the host fell upon Gondolin in the night. The gate of wood burned. The gate of stone was shattered by dragon fire. The defenders of the gate of bronze fought to the last but were overrun. One by one, the gates fell, each collapse hastened by Mieglin's treachery, for he had revealed their weaknesses to the enemy. The battle raged through the streets of Gondolin, house by house, square by square. The elves fought with desperate courage, but they were overwhelmed. Dragons crashed through buildings, Balrogs set entire districts aflame, and orcs poured through the breaches in uncountable numbers. In the Tower of the King, Mieglin tried to seize Idril. But Tuor confronted him, and in the struggle, cast the traitor from the tower's height. Mieglin fell screaming onto the rocks below, his treachery earning him not reward but a traitor's death. But even Tuor's heroism could not save the city. As dawn broke, Turgon looked upon his city in flames and knew that all was lost. He commanded his people to flee through secret passages that led out of the valley, passages known only to a few. Idril had suspected treachery, whether through foresight or simple prudence, and had prepared these escape routes in secret. Now they proved Gondolin's salvation, if salvation it could be called. Thousands fled through the tunnels, harried by Morgoth's forces, but guided by brave rearguards who sacrificed themselves to buy time. They escaped into the mountains, making for the south, for the havens at the mouth of Sirion where refugees from all the fallen kingdoms had gathered. Turgon did not flee. He stood in his tower as the flames rose around him, and there he perished, king to the end. With him died the dream of Gondolin, the last great kingdom of the Noldor. The survivors, led by Tuor and Idril, reached the havens and brought with them a child, Eärendil, son of Tuor and Idril, in whose veins flowed the blood of elves and men both. He would grow to be the greatest mariner the world had known, and his destiny would be bound with the fate of all Middle-earth. But the fall of Gondolin marked a turning point. No longer could the elves hope to stand against Morgoth through strength of arms alone. The kingdoms were shattered, the great fortresses broken. Beleriand itself was dying, torn by war and malice, and the sea was beginning to encroach upon the land. The end of the First Age was approaching, and with it, a doom beyond imagining. After the fall of Gondolin, the elves of Beleriand clung to survival in scattered refuges, shadows of their former glory. The great kingdoms were gone. Hithlum, where Fingolfin had ruled, was occupied by Easterlings, men who served Morgoth. Nargothrond, the hidden fortress, had fallen to Dragonfire years before, its king Finrod Felagund slain in Morgoth's dungeons while trying to aid a mortal man named Beren. That tale of Beren and Luthien was itself a legend within legends, a story of love between mortal and immortal that had briefly kindled hope. Beren, a man, had loved Luthien, daughter of Thingol and Melian, most beautiful of all the children of Iluvatar. To win her hand, he had accomplished the impossible. He had entered Angband itself, stood before Morgoth's throne, and cut a Silmaril from the Iron Crown. The quest had cost him his life, but Luthien's grief had been so great that she followed him beyond death, pleading before Mandos himself. Moved by her song, the Lord of the Dead had restored them both to life, though Luthien became mortal, choosing to share Beren's fate. They lived together in hidden lands, and their love became the one untarnished good to come from the curse of the Silmarils. But the jewel they had won became a curse to others. Thingol, Luthien's father, hired dwarven craftsmen to set the Silmaril in a golden necklace called the Noglamir. But the dwarves, beholding the jewel's beauty, were overcome with greed. They murdered Thingol and fled with their prize, only to be hunted down and slain. The Silmaril was recovered, but Doriath, the hidden kingdom that had stood inviolate for millennia, was now broken, its queen Melian departing to Valinor in grief, the girdle of enchantment falling away. The sons of Feanor, hearing that a Silmaril was in Doriath, came with an army to claim it. This was the second kinslaying, elf against elf once more, the halls of Menegroth running red with blood. But the Silmaril was not there. It had been taken to the havens at the mouths of Sirion by Elwing, Luthien's granddaughter. Morgoth, meanwhile, had achieved dominion over nearly all of Beleriand. His armies roamed unchallenged. The land itself was dying, corrupted by his malice. Forests burned, rivers ran foul, and the very air seemed poisoned. The remaining elves and their mortal allies clung to life in a few desperate strongholds, knowing that complete annihilation was only a matter of time. The sons of Feanor, still bound by their terrible oath, could think only of the Silmarils. Learning that Elwing possessed one at the havens, they demanded its surrender. When she refused, they attacked, the third kinslaying, most shameful of all. The havens burned, and innocents died by the hundreds. But Elwing, rather than surrender the jewel, cast herself into the sea. Ulmo saved her, transforming her into a great white bird, and she flew across the waters bearing the Silmaril, searching desperately for her husband Eärendil, who had sailed west weeks before on a desperate mission. Eärendil the mariner had undertaken what no mortal or elf had dared since the Noldor's exile. He sailed to Valinor to plead for aid. In the ship Vingalot with a small crew of the faithful, he had braved the shadowy seas, the enchanted isles, and all the barriers that the Valar had placed to prevent the exile's return. He succeeded where others had failed, not through strength, but through humility and love. When the Valar barred his way, he made no demands. He came as a petitioner, carrying messages from both elves and men, begging not for himself, but for the innocent peoples of Middle-earth who suffered under Morgoth's tyranny. The Valar, moved by his plea and by the light of the Silmaril that Elwing brought, debated. Some, particularly Mandos, argued that the Noldor's doom should be left to play out, that they had made their choices and must live with the consequences. Others, especially Manwë and Varda, felt pity and recognized that more than the Noldor's fate was at stake. At last, they made their choice. The Valar would go to war. Not since the first battle, when they had overthrown Melkor in the spring of Arda, had the powers taken up arms. But now they prepared for a final reckoning. Manwë summoned the host of Valinor. The Vanyar, who had never left the Blessed Realm, came forth in glittering array. The Maiar took forms of power. Even some of the great Valar themselves prepared to enter Middle-earth once more. But Eärendil and Elwing were forbidden to return to mortal lands. Because Eärendil was half-elven and had touched the Undying Lands, he could not return to Middle-earth as he had been. The Valar offered him and Elwing a choice, to be counted among elves or men. They chose to be numbered with the elves for Elwing's sake, whose heritage was of the firstborn. And Eärendil was given a new task, to sail the skies in Vingalot, which the Valar had hallowed and made able to fly among the stars. The Silmaril was bound to his brow, and he became a living star, a sign of hope to all who dwelt in darkness. Mariners and wanderers would look up and see Gil-Estel, the star of high hope, and know that they were not forgotten. The host of Valinor descended upon Middle-earth like the wrath of the world itself. The War of Wrath, as it came to be called, lasted for more than 40 years. It was not a war of subtle strategy or careful maneuvering, but a cataclysm. Mountains were broken, valleys raised up. The very shape of the earth was changed by the forces unleashed. Morgoth sent forth all his strength. The entire host of Angband, every orc and wolf, every Balrog and dragon. The winged dragons, which had destroyed Gondolin, rose into the sky in numbers beyond counting, breathing fire that scorched the earth. But against them came Eärendil in his flying ship, accompanied by the great eagles led by Thorondor. In the sky above Angband, a battle raged such as had never been seen. Dragons and eagles wheeling and diving, Eärendil's ship blazing with the light of the Silmaril. One by one, the dragons fell, and among them Ankalagan the Black, greatest of all Morgoth's creations, whose fall broke the towers of Thangorodrim and whose body crushed the gates of Angband. On the ground, the host of Valinor swept Morgoth's armies before them. The orcs, so fearsome to elves and men, were as nothing before the power of the Valar. The Balrogs, terrors of the deep places, were destroyed one by one. Morgoth's fortress was breached, his dungeons laid bare, his throne room invaded. Morgoth, for all his power, was at the last a coward. He did not go forth to battle, but cowered in the deepest pit of Angband, begging for pardon when finally he was cornered. There was no pardon. The Valar bound him with the chain Angainer, which had been forged for this purpose in the earliest days. They struck the iron crown from his head, taking the 2 Silmarils that remained, and they cast Morgoth through the door of night into the void beyond the world, where he will remain until the end of days. But victory came at a terrible price. The fury of the war had broken Beleriand. The mountains had fallen, the rivers had dried or diverted, and the land itself was sinking. As the host of Valinor departed, the sea rushed in. Within a span of years, all of Beleriand, the kingdoms of the Noldor and Sindar, the forests and mountains and plains that had been home to elves for millennia, sank beneath the waves. A few highlands remained as islands. Tal Fuin, the Isle of Werewolves, and Himling, where Midros had once ruled. But the rest was drowned, lost forever. Survivors fled east into lands that would become Lindon, or south into what would be called Eriador, or took ship to the new island of Númenor that the Valar raised as a gift for the faithful among men. And the Silmarils. 2 remained after Morgoth's defeat. The Valar would have kept them as holy things, but Midros and Maglar, last surviving sons of Feanor, crept into the victorious camp and stole them, the final, futile act of their oath. But they could not keep what they had sworn to reclaim. The jewels burned them, for their hands were stained with the blood of kinslaying, and the Silmarils rejected them. Midros, mad with pain and despair, cast himself into a fiery chasm, taking his jewel with him into the depths of the earth. Maglar threw his into the sea and wandered away, doomed to walk the shores of Middle-earth forever, singing laments for all that was lost. Thus the 3 Silmarils were sundered, one in the earth, one in the sea, and one in the sky, bound to Eärendil's brow, shining as the evening and morning star. The First Age was ended. The world had been reshaped, kingdoms had fallen, and countless lives had been lost. The elves who survived were diminished, weary, many of them choosing to sail west to Valinor, where they would dwell in peace but never again walk the lands of Middle-earth. But the tale of Arda was not finished. New ages would come, new powers would rise and fall, and the echoes of the First Age would resound through all the millennia to come. Silence fell over the sunken lands. Where once great cities had stood, now only waves rolled. Where forests had whispered ancient songs, now fish swam through drowned valleys. The maps of Middle-earth would have to be redrawn, the very shape of the world fundamentally altered. Beleriand was gone, and with it, an entire age of history, of glory and tragedy intertwined so deeply that none could say where one ended and the other began. The survivors gathered in the remaining lands. Lindon, where Gil-galad was now High King of the Noldor, the last of the great princes to remain in Middle-earth. The Sindar dwelt in scattered woodlands. The Noldor who had survived the wars were few, and most chose to take ship and return at last to Valinor, accepting the pardon that the Valar now offered freely. But some remained, whether from love of Middle-earth, from stubborn pride, or from a sense of duty to see through what their people had begun. They would have roles to play in the ages to come, though they did not know it yet. The Second Age dawned, and it was an age of rebuilding and regrowth. Men, who had been allies of the elves in the wars against Morgoth, were given their reward. The island of Númenor, raised from the sea by the will of the Valar. There the Dunedain, the men of the West, built a civilization that would grow to rival even the glory of the elven kingdoms. Elros, brother of Elrond, became their first king, having chosen to be counted among men rather than elves, accepting mortality for the sake of leading his people. In Middle-earth, the elves dwindled. They built new realms, but these were smaller, quieter than what had come before. Lindon remained their greatest kingdom. In the forests of Mirkwood and Lothlorien, Sylvan elves dwelt under the rule of Sindarin lords. They were fading, not dying, but lessening, their time in Middle-earth drawing slowly to a close. Yet the shadow of the First Age lingered. Sauron, Morgoth's greatest servant, had not been destroyed in the War of Wrath. He had hidden himself, taking no part in the final battle, and when Morgoth was cast into the void, Sauron remained in Middle-earth. For a time, he lay low, but his nature had not changed. He still dreamed of dominion, of ordering the world according to his vision of perfection, a vision that left no room for freedom or choice. In the Second Age, he would rise again, creating the Rings of Power, forging his one ring in the fires of Mount Doom. The war against him would cost untold lives, would see the sinking of Númenor beneath the waves in an echo of Beleriand's fate. And in the end, he would be defeated but not destroyed, setting the stage for the events of the Third Age, when a small creature called a hobbit would carry the fate of all Middle-earth. But those are tales for another time. The First Age belonged to the elves, to their glory, their folly, their courage, and their tragedy. It was the age when they were mightiest and when they fell furthest. It was the age of the Silmarils, jewels of light that brought only darkness to those who possessed them. It was the age of music and discord, of creation and destruction woven together into a pattern that, perhaps, only Iluvatar fully understood. What lessons can be drawn from these ancient days? Perhaps this, that light and darkness are not separate forces, but intertwined aspects of existence. That even the greatest good can lead to terrible evil if pursued without wisdom. That beauty, unguarded by humility, becomes pride. That oaths once sworn become prisons of our own making. That the desire to possess, even righteous desire, can corrupt the desirer. Or perhaps the lesson is simpler, that in the end, no matter how great the power arrayed against it, hope survives. That love, such as Beren and Luthien's, can achieve what armies cannot. That courage, such as Fingolfin's when he challenged Morgoth himself to single combat, echoes through the ages. That sacrifice, like Finrod's in the dungeons of Tolling Gorhoth, is never forgotten. The elves who survived the First Age carried these memories with them. They sang songs of the fallen kingdoms, of Gondolin's white towers and Nargothrond's hidden halls. They told tales of heroes, of Hurin who defied Morgoth, of Turin whose tragic fate was woven by the enemy's malice, of Eärendil who became a star. They remembered the two trees, though they were gone forever, and the light of the Silmarils, now lost to sky and sea and earth. And on clear nights, looking up, they could see Gil-Estel, the star of high hope, making his eternal voyage across the heavens. Eärendil the Blessed, who had been mortal and elven both, who had achieved what none thought possible, who had become the bridge between earth and heaven, between the children of Iluvatar and the powers who shaped the world. His light was a promise that the darkness, no matter how deep, is not eternal, that the music continues even when we cannot hear it, that every ending is also a beginning. The First Age ended in fire and flood, in the drowning of lands and the breaking of kingdoms. But from those ruins, new stories grew. The heirs of those who survived would go on to new adventures, new loves, new sorrows, and new triumphs. The thread of history ran on, woven on a loom too vast for mortal comprehension, each age adding its own colors and patterns to the great tapestry. And somewhere, in the timeless halls beyond the circles of the world, the music continues. the theme of Iluvatar that encompasses all that was, is, and will be. The discord that Melkor introduced has been woven into the greater pattern, made part of a design more beautiful and terrible than any of the Aenir could have imagined. For in the end, the story of the First Age is not merely a tale of elves and jewels, of wars and kingdoms. It is a meditation on the nature of creation itself, on how beauty can arise from tragedy, how hope can kindle in darkness, how endings and beginnings are the same moment seen from different sides. The First Age is over. Beleriand is lost beneath the waves, the Silmarils are scattered beyond recovery, and the great heroes sleep in the halls of Mandos or sail the immortal seas. But the echoes remain. In every act of courage, we hear Fingolfin's challenge. In every selfless sacrifice, we see Finrod's choice. In every enduring love, we remember Beren and Luthien. In every hope against darkness, we look up and see Eärendil's star. The First Age may be ended, but its lessons, its beauty, and its sorrow are eternal, woven into the very fabric of Middle-earth, resonating through all the ages that followed, a song that will never entirely fade. And perhaps, when the world finally ends and the second music begins, when all that has been sung is revealed in its fullness, when every tragedy finds its meaning and every sorrow its consolation, perhaps then the tale of the First Age will be understood at last. But until that day, the story endures, passed from generation to generation, sung in elvish halls and whispered around human fires, a fragment of the great music preserved in words and memory. Listen, and you might hear it even now, the sound of ancient songs, the echo of footsteps in drowned halls, the whisper of a tale that refuses to be forgotten. Will the songs of the Aenir ever be free from shadow? We do not know, but we know this: as long as the stars shine, as long as hearts remember, as long as courage kindles in the face of darkness, the light of the First Age will never truly die. Dear listener, this story ends, but many await. Subscribe so no tale escapes you.